Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome along to this media conference. I'm joined obviously by three other ministers, Honourable Michael Wood, who among other things is the lead minister for Auckland in terms of our cyclone recovery, but is also the Associate Minister of Finance, who's done quite a lot of work around the piece of work that we're going to be discussing today. Kieran McAnulty, who is the Regional Lead Minister for Hawke's Bay, and Kitty Allen, who's the Regional Lead Minister for Tairāwhiti. I want to start today by acknowledging that the period of time since Cyclone Gabrielle and the Auckland anniversary weekend floods has been enormously stressful for a lot of New Zealanders. Those families and households who have been impacted have been carrying with them the trauma of what happened on those days for the last 108 days in the case of Cyclone Gabrielle. I want to acknowledge that this has been a tough period of time for them, and continue to acknowledge that the government and indeed local government continues to be with you and stay with you throughout this process. Today is a big day, but there are more big days to come, and we acknowledge that and want to make sure that everyone in affected communities knows that we are in this for the long haul. I just want to briefly recap on the process that has got us to this point now. Through the work of the Cyclone Task Force, insurers, local councils and other government agencies, we have been undertaking a risk assessment process across the most impacted areas from the cyclone and the Auckland anniversary weekend floods. The reason for taking on that process was to make sure that there was a consistent set of information on which future decisions could be based. We were able to use data that insurers had, along with data that local councils had, to ensure that we had that single source of information. At the beginning of the month, beginning of May, we announced the series of categories that we had. Category 1 being areas where repair to previous state is all that is required to manage a future severe weather event risk. Category 2 being community or property level interventions are needed to manage future severe weather event risk, but that could include the raising of stop banks or improving drainage or property level works. And Category 3, areas in which there was a high risk that it would not be safe to live in the event of future flooding or landslips. Homes in these areas would not be able to be rebuilt on their current sites, although there may be other land uses for them. So that exercise has been gone through over the course of the last few weeks. The process has been locally led and will continue to be locally led. That is a commitment that we made right at the beginning of this. We would support local communities and local councils to make decisions, and what we're announcing today is further evidence of that, but that we would also ensure that local voices led the way, and that will continue to be the case as we make advances over the next few weeks. In terms of what we are talking about today, the focus is obviously around Category 2 and Category 3 properties that are in Category 2 or Category 3. In terms of Category 2, the areas where further mitigation and works will enable people essentially to stay in the communities that they're in. A process now is going to be worked through between councils and the government to develop up plans and business cases for the work that is required. You'll be aware that Budget 2023, we announced an initial $100 million payment for this financial year that could contribute to that work. Business cases will be developed over the next few months, and we hope to have all of that work finalised by early next year, so there is certainty for people around how that will work. What the government is committing to today is a cost-sharing approach to Category 2, as evidenced by that funding that we announced. When it comes to Category 3, what has been announced today is that we have a series of indicative assessments, and you will have seen that in Hawke's Bay, for example. The council has released maps around the Category 3 areas. Those assessments will now be worked through by councils with those who are affected. But what we can confirm today is that the government will be supporting local councils to provide a voluntary buyout scheme for people who are in Category 3. The costs will be split between central and local government. The process to understand how that split will work is underway and will be completed by the end of June. Obviously, there are a number of issues to work through when it comes to how those costs will be split. And we are working with councils on issues such as valuation criteria, how we deal with insured and uninsured, and who ends up with the final ownership of land. That process, as I say, we hope to complete by the end of June, and that will align with the discussions that councils are having with affected property owners over the course of the next little while. Obviously, there is regional difference, which we indicated some time ago in terms of the exact time frame. So in terms of Hawke's Bay, they have released the maps and so on today. In terms of the Auckland Council, they will begin their discussions, I believe, Minister Wood, from the 12th of June with those in affected areas in the Tairāwhiti. Some of those contacts have already been made, and further contacts will be made over the coming weeks. And there are two other matters just before we come to questions. The other is that there is a parallel process underway here for whenua Māori. There are significant complexities and issues with multiple ownership of land. Clearly, in a number of cases, we have significant sites for different iwi and hapu, including marae, urupa, and so on. We want to work through that in a careful and considered way. That consultation, given Treaty of Waitangi obligations, will be led centrally by Te Arawhiti and the Cyclone Response Unit and DPMC, in line with local councils as well. It is definitely a complex area. It's one where initial discussions have begun, but that will exist in parallel to the process that has been announced today. And then finally, just to be clear, today's announcement is about residential properties. That does include residential properties on commercial land, but it is about residential properties. When it comes to the future of businesses and commercial operations, in particular orchards and farms and so on, we have discussions underway already, including with, for example, the horticulture sector, on what further support will be available from the government. We also have a series of regional recovery plans where the regions are bringing together their overall thoughts around what a regional recovery plan would look like, and again, how the government might be able to support that. So those discussions are ongoing, but today's discussions are about the importance of supporting people in residential properties with their next decision. Just before we come to questions, Minister Wood, would you like to add anything to that?
Thank you, Minister Robertson. The one point that I will add is that as we've worked our way through this process, the government has been focused on striking a very careful balance between making decisions in a timely manner and giving communities, households, the certainty that they need to move forward, but also getting it right, because these are very big decisions. And as the process moves forward, the categorisations that councils will announce in the coming period will be on an indicative basis. So there will still be an opportunity for households to engage with councils to raise questions about those before final decisions are made in the coming months.
Thanks, Minister. Questions?
Are you confident that you're not making the same mistakes as the government did with the Christchurch red zones?
I'm confident in the process that we've got, and one of the reasons for that is because it is locally led, and that is a big difference from what occurred down in Christchurch and Canterbury. We have tried to learn as many lessons as we possibly can from that. What we do know is that by bringing together the data from insurers and local government and central government, that's one of the first hurdles, because one of the issues in Christchurch was insurers having a different view from everybody else. So that's an important step forward from where we've been. Secondly, this is an ongoing process. So particularly for those in Category 3 today, they're learning the first assessment that's been undertaken. There is now a process for them to engage with their local council around how they feel about that, whether they think it's accurate. It's really important that what we've done has been based on evidence. So these are evidence-based assessments, but obviously people will want to go through and make sure they understand them when it impacts on them. So because of all of those reasons and the ongoing process we've got, I'm confident in what we're doing.
It's not just likely to change.
We'll just, do you want to finish, or are you following up, Jenna, and then we'll come over?
East residents that we've spoken to today are gutted that there's no government officials down there walking them through this, that all of this landed in an email at 10 a.m, that it wasn't very personal. Why did no one go and communicate this to them?
So this is being led locally by the councils, and they are making the decisions about how they communicated. So you would need to put that specific question to them. I believe, well, because we're here today, because we are doing what central government's doing, which is providing support to local councils. We've all been in the region many times, but local government have made the decision about how they've released that information. They, as I understand it, decided that they wanted to make sure everyone got it in the same way, and that's why they've chosen the method they have. But there will be significant ongoing conversations, face-to-face and in other formats. And as we have throughout the process, we will be present in the region.
Would the Minister responsible for the region not have gone up and been there for this?
Again, these are locally led processes. What we're standing here today is to confirm to those people that the government is going to contribute to a voluntary buyout of their property working with local councils. That is a significant decision, and it's one that I hope will start to give them certainty.
Are these numbers likely to change?
In terms of which numbers, the dollars, the people,
Categories, so Category 2 and Category 3?
So clearly these are indicative assessments in the case of Category 2 and 3, and there may well be some shifts between them, but again, the work that we've done is to make sure that the assessments are evidence-based. So on the evidence we have now, this is where they are. Councils will be working through that with local communities, so no doubt there will be some shifts around at the margins, but this is the assessment we've got to this point.
What is your commitment to those who weren't red stickered but are in the Category 3 zone?
Yeah, so we've tried to explain this before, that the stickering, as it were, was not the same as this process. So just because you were in a red stickered property didn't mean that it could never be fixed, and vice versa as well could be the case. So what we've tried to do, that's simply a process that's gone through in the immediate aftermath around what is the immediate issues and risks and dangers. This process is much more about a longer term process around, can this property or these properties be lived in again? If not, that's Category 3. If so, what mitigations are required? That's Category 2. If there are no mitigations required, that's Category 1.
In your commitment to Category 3, I appreciate you're still working through details around insurance, but could you provide any more clarity around how a buyout would interact with someone's private insurance?
So that is one of the issues that will need to be worked through. Clearly, where one possibility within that would be that if a Category 3 property is being purchased essentially or bought out, that the insurance would go with that. So the insurance payout could go with that. That is one possibility, but those are the issues that we're working through with councils now.
I guess, from the taxpayer's perspective, the risk is that the government ends up footing more of the bill when actually, that sort of is meant to be with the insurer. Yeah. So how would you?
So that's why I just said. So insurance becomes one of the factors within this. What the government is saying today is that above and beyond that, we want to support local councils with the ability to make these voluntary, and bear in mind we're still talking voluntary here, voluntary buyout decisions. We think that that is something the government should and can do, but I want to be very clear, the government is in no position to be able to meet the total costs of these kinds of disasters. They, unfortunately, are now going to be more regular events into the future. What today is about is signalling that we're prepared to support local councils. Part of that process is understanding where insurance fits within this. So there is the other issue of uninsured people, and what decisions we now need to make about whether there will be a differentiation, for example, between what an insured and an uninsured person gets. That work takes place over the next couple of weeks, but Janae, we're very mindful of the issues that you're raising.
Are you able to put any kind of rough figure on the overall cost either of the buyout and or the Category 2 flood mitigation?
In Category 2, that's extremely difficult to do at the moment, and so that's the process we now go through with the business cases through the rest of this year. In the case of Category 3, clearly one of the really important factors which is still to be resolved is the question of valuation and exactly how that falls. So that will be a critical point in this. I can say that in a ballpark figure we've been looking at around in terms of our kind of planning process for the entire buyout process, so that's not the government share, but the entire buyout process is around the $1 billion mark. That's around the whole country, but that is obviously a ballpark number because we haven't gone through that full valuation process.
Could you establish how this funding arrangement between government and councils is going to work?
Well, that's the process that we're now going through. So we will have discussions over the next couple of weeks to finalise that. It's important from our point of view that this remains locally led. So ultimately the buyout decisions, the final buyout decisions will be made by local councils. What we're saying today is we're prepared to step up and support that and co-fund that, but you'll understand there's a lot of detail to work through, but I'm confident we'll do that over the next few weeks.
Do we have an estimation on how many homes or properties in Auckland are in Category 3?
The final numbers will still be worked through as we get into the next stage of the process. The initial indications are that particularly in the flood affected areas we're possibly looking at around about 400 properties in the Category 3 area, and a significantly larger number of homes who are within Category 2 areas.
Joe?
You mentioned in your opening remarks that homeowners would still have the opportunity to work through this, negotiate. Can you just talk through that process a little bit more for someone who's sitting listening to this?
Yeah.
How much opportunity do they have? How much leeway and sort of movement might there be in terms of Category 2 to Category 3, but also perhaps people who aren't even in categories who feel
Yeah.
like perhaps they should be?
So that's exactly the process that local councils will now be doing. The dates slightly vary from council to council, but in the case of Hawke's Bay, that will start from the 9th of June. In the case of Auckland, that'll start from the 12th of June. And that process will be, virtually one-on-one. And in some cases, I'm sure it'll be repeat engagements as well to understand, firstly, the assessment and, be confident in what the assessment looks like, and then work through the process from there. Meantime, we'll be sorting out the split, but the commitment today is a commitment to a voluntary buyout scheme for people in Category 3.
Are you
idea how
putting
many
a
people want to
timeline
meet?
though on when I guess that negotiation needs to be done, just so that people can have confidence in when things
Yeah,
actually
look,
start?
that will be very much up to local authorities, but I think everybody in this scenario understands the importance of moving as swiftly as we possibly can to give that level of certainty. Again, it's always a little bit of a balance, isn't it? Because had we come out today and said, this is it, there's no negotiations, people wouldn't be happy about that. Equally, we know we don't want it to last forever. So local councils will and us will be working together on that, but we all have a desire to give people certainty as soon as we can. Luke?
Sorry, can I just clarify the answer to Adam's question? 700 homes was what was said for Category 3. Are you saying 400 of them are in Auckland?
Those are the indicative estimates that we have at the moment from our engagement with Auckland Council. That particularly pertains to homes which are in flood-affected areas. We have a number of homes in Auckland who are facing
Still more work to do. Luke?
The voluntary buyout aspect. If you live in a Category 3 area, voluntary buyout take the voluntary buyout. What will be their chance of getting insurance?
Well, that's definitely will be an issue. As you may or may not know, there are still people who live in the Christchurch red zone because some people simply decided that they didn't want to go. However, that exposes them to a number of potential risks if they did that. But it is important to us that this is a voluntary buyout scheme.
So it's voluntary in the sense from I suppose, the state's point of view. You can stay or you can go. However, there are
always going to be consequences to that, and obviously we don't control the insurance market, and so what insurers say they'll do is up to them, but this is based on data and risk assessments provided by local councils, insurers, and also central government.
have you had any, because obviously, when people are making decisions, this will be a pretty important aspect, right? Whether you can insure your main probably bit of equity in your life. Have you had any indicative conversations with insurers about whether they will be prepared to insure in those areas?
Well, the reason someone is in Category 3 is because the prospect of being able to safely rebuild is not there. So therefore, that will make, insurers have been part of that discussion. I do invite you to talk to them directly about their views on this, but obviously the reason we've taken a bit of time to get to this point is to make sure that we think the data is robust on that. Friday.
Sorry, just to tease a bit more how long you expect this whole process to take. Can you sort of give any rough figure, like less than 5 years?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, we'd like to see. I personally would like to see this wrapped up inside a year. But I also have been the minister for the Earthquake Commission and various other things dealing with things that happened in Canterbury, and I've always been very wary about putting timelines on any aspect of this process. But that would be the kind of goal I would have. But there is a lot to work through, and I'm sorry, I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but this is a locally led process. This will be councils who are the closest to their communities making decisions about the buyout. We are here to support that because we recognise that this is a massive deal for those communities.
So you can sort of commit that people will get a sort of pre-disaster fair market value?
Yeah, so the valuation process we have to go through, but we absolutely, one of the principles on this is being as fair as we can possibly be. There is a place here for property owners who I'm sure they will understand themselves. They are bearing part of the cost of this already. And so they'll understand that as we go through that valuation process, we want it to be as fair as possible. That is clearly one of the areas that we're talking through with local government at the moment on.
Minister, you've noted that we'll only see more and more of these climate events. Does this voluntary buyout set an expectation or a precedent that kind of when a climate event hits, that people will expect some sort of compensation or buyout from the government?
Well, what it's an understanding of is two things. The first, that these are major shocks to people's lives, and we need to, as a government, working with local government, work out where we sit on that. But what we've been very clear about today, and you'll see it's in our media release and all the comments we're making, the government simply cannot bear all of the cost of this. Individuals already are bearing the cost of this. Clearly insurance is an important matter, and I mentioned before in answer to earlier questions that, that will be a factor in where the buyout reaches. But local government obviously hasn't got all the resources in the world either. Let's be clear, the number of people in Category 3 areas today, and it's devastating, I imagine, for some of those people to hear that news today, also the certainty that they wanted in some cases, but we're talking here about around 700 properties, so this has been a very careful scientific assessment to say we genuinely don't think these areas are places where it's safe for people to live now. So there are limitations around what we're doing here, and the government is making very clear today that as these events unfold over future years, we're here to help, we're here to support, but we cannot meet all of the costs.
Just following up on that, you mentioned also some of the complexities regarding the process with whenua Māori. Are you able just to elaborate a little bit on that, and is the government committed to meeting all its te tiriti obligations?
I'm happy to invite Minister Allen to come forward on this as well, but yes is the answer to the second part of your question, and one of the reasons why we have adopted a parallel process is exactly because of those obligations. There have already been discussions, obviously, with iwi and hapu as we've been going through this process, and there are, whenua Māori is a different category of land under law, and so therefore we are working through that process with iwi and hapu involved. It is a very complex process, but as I indicated, we are doing that differently in the sense that that is centrally led. So that is led by Te Arawhiti and the Cyclone Response Unit in DPMC with local government alongside us. That reflects exactly what you've said in your question.
Just to follow up on Karen's previous question, is this basically the framework that we'll use for any further disastrous weather events?
Every event has to be judged on its own merits, clearly, but what we are signalling here is that we are happy to provide support. We think it's the right thing to do to provide support to local councils to make progress on, getting their communities back, getting people back to normal. But each situation will be looked at. But the idea that we are a partner, that we would do some cost sharing, I suspect will be a part. This is not new, by the way. So we have communities such as Matata, where that was dealt with as a partnership between the regional and district council and central government. We've got Westport, which is an example of a partnership between central government and local government. So this isn't new. We're building off the examples that we've got, and as we learn more and we understand more, we'll go forward. I can imagine, Jenna, in the future, that actually, as we come to terms with the regularity of these extreme weather events, governments may start to think about how do we finance this. So we've got EQC. Is there an equivalent that might look like that in the future? That isn't a decision for today. We have to deal with the situation that's in front of us today, and that's why we're partnering in the way we are.
It's been categorised as level 3 today. If they decide to stay on their land, the government's not going to do anything about it.
We're here about a voluntary buyout process. Now, bear in mind, we're supporting the council to do that. The councils have certain powers already that exist for them legally now. We're not getting in the way of any of that. What we're committing to is supporting them in the voluntary buyout process.
On the insurance matter, will you provide any support to people who are struggling to get a full payout from insurance companies?
Already got that one for you. That is the New Zealand Claims Resolution Service, which was funded, was pre-announced, but it was funded in the budget. And that service born from the Greater Christchurch Claims Resolution Service, is specifically designed to support people in those circumstances. It's actually already being used by quite a few people in this process, and given the opportunity to say it, I'll put an advert in for it, that if people are concerned about where they're at with their insurance process, that is the place to go. The New Zealand, the New Zealand Claims Resolution Service. Kia ora. Yes.
What does consultation with Māori actually look like?
Well, I'm happy for Kitty to come in and have a chat about that.
Yeah, I think it looks a little differently depending on the place and the iwi and the hapu and the nature of the land holdings. So it ties into a little bit of Minister Robertson's response to Jenna on the way in which local government has been engaging. For example, the Gisborne District Council yesterday made the calls to the 17 residents that are impacted, and many of them are Māori whānau. So at a higher level, the treaty responsibility and the treaty partnership, that sits with us, the government, which is why we have such a hands-on engagement or undertaking this parallel process with Māori. That's led by Minister Davis and others through Te Arawhiti, directly with those iwi, and they're meeting regularly. How that plays out, though, on the ground, that looks like direct relationships between myself and those iwi, Minister McAnulty, all of us as well, making sure that we are really understanding what the issues are and being responsive the entire way through, supporting local council where they can't necessarily undertake that role as well.
And just to add to that, I think of the example of where I visited at Omahu Marae, where there is a succession of different types of land holdings around the marae. So you've got the marae itself, you've got urupa, you've also got whānau-owned homes, you've got papakainga homes linked to the iwi, all there. It is a matter of literally going through and understanding that. The big issue here is obviously the future of collectively owned land, where you have thousands of shareholders in the land, some of them not even in Aotearoa. That will require a very bespoke process. What we want to do is get, as Minister Allen's alluded to, a set of principles clear and then start moving through in that hapu by hapu, iwi by iwi process.
Does the direct relationship mean a direct funding?
Yeah, in parts it does, and that's what we've seen, for example, through the budget 23. We saw direct funding through Te Puni Kōkiri for rebuilding of homes on whenua Māori and within papakainga. I think it was about $30 million, correct me if I'm wrong, Minister right. Robson. And that's one type of funding. There'll also be, I can speak directly to the iwi within Mairohe, a very close relationship with making sure that the government agencies are working alongside, that's housing rebuilds, silt removal, etc., making sure that that's being funded as we go. It is a little bit of a rolling maul approach, and so we make decisions and we are responsive as needs be, and I think that that's something that we've shown throughout this whole process that we're continued and readily engaged in and continue to work with.
Adam. How long does the consultation process take with Māori?
I guess what I'd say there is that consultation isn't a start and a stop, it's ongoing, particularly in a response situation like this. From day dot, our treaty partnership with iwi Māori has been at the forefront. There's never been any stage, for example, as the minister responsible for the recovery in Te Rāwhiti, that iwi haven't been firmly at that table, telling us and making sure that we are engaging with them on their recovery plans and what they need for us. So I'd say it's not static, it's ongoing.
So I can imagine there are
in the Category 3 zone.
I beg your pardon?
Do you have any idea what will happen next to the no-go zones? What plans do you have for those no-go zones, since no one can...
For whenua Māori and on...
For both whenua Māori and what the government wants to do with that.
In terms of Category 3, just to be really clear, this is local councils that are leading this. So the decisions about exactly what occurs from here on are in the hands of local councils. What we're announcing today is our support for a voluntary buyout program for people in those categories. As I mentioned just before, a process begins in the case of Hawke's Bay on the 9th of June to sit down and go through with each of those property owners exactly what the next steps are for them. In parallel to that, we're finalising the mechanics around our funding and how the buyout then works, and it will go from there. So that will be locally led, council by council. When it comes to whenua Māori, that is the whole point of the process that we're doing, is to try to understand where whenua Māori is within risk assessments. Yes, Adam and Enzo.
I can imagine there are people in Auckland and Tairāwhiti in particular who are looking at the maps released in Hawke's Bay and are now desperate to know whether they're in category 3 or 2 or whatever it is. Now, I know it's locally led, but would it have been preferable for you or to you to see maps released at the same time so that you didn't have that? Because they just won't know.
Yeah, so I'll start, and I'm sure the Minister would, and Minister Allen may want to carry on from there. The first thing I do want to do is acknowledge local government and the work that local government have done in pulling this together today. Each region has been in a slightly different process, and that's what you get, to be frank, with a locally led process. And so different communities today are getting information a slightly different way. What they're all getting is certainty that if you are in category 3, there will be a voluntary buyout regime. And I know for some of the communities in the areas that aren't in Hawke's Bay, that certainty is welcome. But Minister Wood, can you add to that?
Sure. One of the reasons that the government has made the decisions that we have at the time we have, and one of the reasons that we signalled that some time ago, was to provide a point of focus for local government to make sure that we were beginning to get those decisions coming through in the late May, early June period. I've been in extensive dialogue with Auckland Council about their plans for getting that information out there and giving community certainty. So the Minister of Finance said that process will begin in the week of the 12th of June, so the week after next. The key reason why they're just taking just a little bit more time is they want to be assured that once that information is out there, they're obviously going to get a lot of questions from people. We are talking about thousands of households in Auckland who will be within Category 2 areas, and they want to make sure that they've got the capacity and the systems and the information to be able to respond to that. The last thing we want is someone who receives a categorisation wants to call up the call centre or get some information and can't get what they need to know. So they're just taking the time to focus on that to make sure they can support people after they've given those categorisation decisions.
Minister Robertson, you indicated some weeks ago that some people in Category 2 could potentially be compensated if they didn't feel safe living there. Why has that been ruled out?
Well, because the approach we're taking on Category 2 is effectively a community level approach. So what we're looking at there is the assessment is that those areas are ones where with mitigation work, like a stop bank or drainage improvements, there is no reason why those people can't carry on and face a further weather event. So it is effectively a different type of categorisation, and I think it's important that we let that process run through with ourselves and councils looking at the business cases for that work. So that's where that's landed. I think it's important that people have certainty about what happens in each category.
Circle back to when you were talking about Westport, and there's other places too, like Nelson, etc. I take the point that there's work being done there in terms of flood stop banks and things like that, but there are also families there who have literally rebuilt 2, 3, 4 times who don't want to be living there. While this might set a precedent, does it also look backwards, and could it potentially help people who have been through that circumstance already, but it has been, I guess, much smaller in scale and fewer people involved?
There's a very important distinction, and in saying this, I don't want to sound harsh at all, because I have a great deal of sympathy for those who've been affected by earlier events. This is not a question of whether somebody wants or does not want to live in a place. This is a question of a thorough risk assessment that has concluded on the basis of a variety of data and assessments by different stakeholders who are key to these decisions, that these are not properties that can be mitigated to withstand a future flood event. That is a different process than simply saying, I've had this horrendous time, which has undoubtedly been horrendous for people, and I don't want to live here. So that is a very important distinction. The second thing I'd say is this, as I've answered to Jenna before, this is an evolving process, and the severity and regularity of weather events means that we're going to have to keep moving forward and looking ahead, but that distinction is the distinction that I make about it.
So the assessment that has been done in this case was the same assessment that was done in these other locations? Well,
indeed, local councils will have been making those kinds of assessments. The process that we've used this time, I would judge as probably more integrated than any of those processes, because we did bring the insurers in to the picture.
Category 2,
Janae and then we'll come up.
for Category 3, could you give us a sense of how the costs will be split between councils and government? Are we talking 50-50 or 20-80?
That's the process we're going through now. So we don't have an answer for you today on that. I think I've been pretty clear in the comments to your earlier questions that the Crown cannot wear all of the costs here, but what we want to do is work through with local government. Local government themselves have pretty stretched balance sheets. We all know that. And so what we want to do is make a principled-based decision around that split. Then I'm sure there will be conversations that follow from that with local government about how we all finance our way through this. But we haven't made those decisions, so I can't answer that question today.
Just in terms of like the ballpark $1 billion figure, so that was for category 3 buyouts. That was just a rough number, right? So if you go $1 billion divided by 700, that's 1.4 million per property. That sounds quite high. So how does...
It is a very, very much a ballpark figure, and it depends a little bit on a lot of different calculations. So, you'll notice when I answered the question, I didn't really want to go there because it is such a ballpark figure, but I want to be transparent that that's where our thinking is.
Just one more thing on just the way the insurance works, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but say you have your property sum insured for, I don't know, $500,000 for the house.
Mm-hmm.
So you get the 500 from the insurer, you might get something from EQC, and then the difference between that and what you think the value is, that's what the government top-up would be? How does
That is one way that it could happen. So I'm not going to, we haven't finalised that valuation process, but the point you'll make, so I'm not going to say that's exactly how it would happen, but the point you're making is an important one, because that the amount of insurance somebody has in a property is going to be a factor within how this works. Jenna?
And is that a formula that you're going?
So, look, we haven't finalised that, so we're looking to make sure that in our work with councils, the funding that we provide to support councils to make this, clearly that's taxpayers' money, and we want to make sure that that's been spent well and has been spent on a principled basis. But we are now getting into the things we will be negotiating with local government over the next few weeks.
The Category 2 mitigation stuff. Mm-hmm. What kind of timeline are we looking at for that actual mitigation work to happen? Because
to actually happen, yeah.
But a bunch of people whose homes aren't really livable, they're having to rent other homes, and then they've got to wait until clean up mitigation before it's safe again.
Look, it is really challenging, and I just want to be careful though about the language about whether something is livable or not livable. What Category 2 is saying is we think there are mitigations that mean you will be able to withstand future events. I'll give you an example. The day we went up to Hawke's Bay and announced the budget stuff, we stood beside the stop bank that had been raised. From woe to go, that was about an 11-month project to lift that stop bank all the way. We clearly are going to want to be moving as fast as we can so that those people who are in properties within Category 2 feel confident about being there. But we've also got to be honest about the fact that we cannot click our fingers and make what will be very significant changes around the country all in one go, all at once. So the process we're going to go through over the next little while is working with councils on business cases for what they want to be done. Indeed, at a community level, if there are other things that are more like a drainage system or something like that that can be done, and move as swiftly as we can. And as I indicated before, we want to finalise that by early next year so that we've got certainty. Then, you're right, there is a question about how long it will actually take to do those works, and that will be something that people in Category 2 areas will be having to think through themselves along with their councils. Did you want to say something, Michael?
Just, the one thing that's important to note there is that within Category 2 there is a distinction there between properties where a property level intervention and a community level intervention is likely to be the best solution, and that is likely to also have a bearing in terms of the time it will take. Generally speaking, those community level or catchment level interventions will be bigger than a property level intervention.
Where are you going to build a stop bank? So how long until those people who don't have any certainty over whether they're Category 3 or Category 2 today, how long until they know that, and then how long until they know what intervention, and then how long until that intervention happens and they feel safe again?
Sure. Look, I met with some of the people from West Auckland actually just before we came in here today, and for them having some certainty about there being a plan for both 3 and 2 was the key thing for now that has given them some hope that there is a way through what has been a really difficult situation for them. In the case of Auckland, there's been a lot of good work which is going into looking at those areas, those stream catchments that have been so difficult in recent times and through Gabrielle and the floods. And that will involve a mix of property, community level. There are ways of managing water. Sometimes it's about making space, sometimes it's about what we call nature-based solutions, where we allow wetlands and other things to do some of the work in those spaces. And it will be a mix of those things in different catchments. But again, this will be a locally led response from Auckland Council. They tend to own the infrastructure, the assets, and have the regulatory tools. But in that particular area, there has been quite a lot of work advanced in recent months.
We're just going to move to wrapping up, so we'll come to Adam and then Bridie and then Benny. Yep.
From the Hawke's Bay Ministerial Lead, just because I can imagine, well, I know that the release of today's maps will have been incredibly impactful, especially for people in Esk and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, what was pretty clear when you're on the ground is that people just wanted to have as much certainty as possible. They just want to know what they're going to be able to do. They don't necessarily need to know exactly what's going to happen, but they need that reassurance to know that if they are in Category 3, that they will get bought out. And that's the confirmation today between local and central government. They will be bought out. And those that are in Category 2, they've got the assurances that they can move back and can carry on. And if there's anyone in Category 2 that don't want to stay for personal reasons, at least they now know that the insurance companies have told us that those properties will be insured moving forward. So that must be incredibly reassuring to them. But for the Hawke's Bay councils to get to where they are today, to be able to reassure those people, I think has been a tremendous effort. You know, there's 4 councils and a regional council. It's clear that Hawke's Bay has seen massive damage, and they've been under the pump to provide that certainty. So to be able to do that alongside the government announcement that we will step up and help financially, I think will be reassuring for a lot of people.
Will there be any specific mental health support wrapped around or directly targeted through the consultation process with people in Category 2 and Category 3 in particular? Because I can imagine this process will be huge for them.
Yes, there will be. While the councils are leading the categorisation work, there's still a responsibility to ensure that those that need assistance for personal or health reasons will get it, and that is absolutely a priority.
Just to clarify, so if residents don't opt for the buyout, can they still rebuild?
I beg your pardon, if they don't.
They don't.
In Category 3? Yeah. So again, this is the issue we were saying before, that, you know, from our perspective, this is us supporting the councils to make this decision. It is voluntary. Obviously, if somebody was wanting to do that, there are certain processes that they would need to go through, like consents, resource consents and so forth, which would be decisions that the local council would then make. So, you know, was I think Luke's question earlier on, you know, it is a theoretical possibility and in fact a real one in the case of Christchurch. However, there are lots of hoops and existing laws and existing regulations that would come into play at that point. We'll finish with Ben.
On the Category 3 homes, given you're dealing with different councils with different resources, would you be looking, when it comes to cost sharing, to strike different deals in different parts of the country?
I think it is really important that we have a common shared principled basis for that, and so our intention would be that actually it would be, you know, the same across councils. It was the answer I gave earlier on about then the conversation is, if you're a small local authority, how would that be, your share be financed? So, you know, we can agree on a percentage split, but then there are councils here demonstrably that are of very different sizes, have very different, you know, abilities to do that. Those conversations could then be ongoing, and I don't want to get too into that today because I think there are some options there, but that would be the way that we would understand the differentiation between councils rather than a different percentage.
Put up loans for those smaller councils.
There is already, you know, for example, there's a thing called the LGFA, Local Government Financing Agency, which already exists to do this kind of work. So that could be a model for that kind of thing, but that's the stuff we've got to work through with councils.
Those smaller councils, do they have the resources to be carrying out Category 2? Are you confident they've got resources there?
So one of the things that actually, thank you for asking, one of the things that we haven't talked about today is alongside, you know, the $100 million and future funding that would be potential co-funding for Category 2 mitigations is technical support, and we are and have committed to councils to continue, and we're already doing some of this, to provide them with the technical support to get to the point of being able to put those up, those sorts of proposals up. So that's actually part of what we're committing to.
Where does technical support come from?
Largely it'll come from government agencies who have that, but also no doubt there'll be other individuals out there that can help. And as I say, we've already been doing that work. Sorry folks, catch you later on. Thanks.